Okay.
Good morning.
Welcome to everyone. This is the fifth in our series, using Blackboard with face-to-face, hybrid, and online synchronous and asynchronous courses. This session is going to be talking about developing outcomes and assessments and utilizing the Blackboard shell and utilizing the LMS to kind of help and to kind of work within those parameters. John, I'll turn it over to you and let you get started.
Okay, very good. I hope everybody can see my opening screen here. I think I shared it properly, so we can get started. First thing, Rick is already introduced, so we'll move ahead here. Rick, did you want to mention anything specific about today's topic of developing outcomes and assessments?
Just a kind of a primer, if you would. Please remember, and I kind of was saying this before we started recording, and as people were jumping in. Remember that this series, this is the fifth in a series of 6, but remember the focus for these are on basics. There's a lot of very elaborate things that Blackboard can do, and there's some things that some of you may want to do, and we can certainly talk about those offline, but through this series, what we're doing is just basically staying to a basic focus, giving everybody the basic foundational tools to understand how to develop outcomes and assessments and how to integrate those within an LMS Blackboard shell. And we'll be showing you some basic things again today. So, John, I'll turn this back over to you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, first of all, before we get started into the new material for today, I just wanted to go back over and recap very briefly what we did in session 4, which was on Monday. Most of you may have been there, maybe a few of you weren't. I'm hoping that I know we're going through a lot of the material quite quickly. In the interest of time, I'm hoping that the recordings will be helpful, as Rick mentioned before, so that you can always go back and pick up something, look at it from the Blackboard shell, revisit it. And also, if you have any specific questions on how to do any of the items that we're showing, or we work with your Blackboard shell, that's what the CIT is for, and they're more than willing to help you as well. So in terms of the review, what we looked at on Wednesday was how to incorporate different types of instructional materials into the Blackboard shell, regardless of whether it was face-to-face, hybrid, asynchronous or synchronous online. And today's is focusing on assessment, but really, in essence, it's hard to separate the two because instructional materials should be interwoven in with the way in which you assess students on how they've grasped the control of the information you provided in the instructional materials and online lessons. So think about this as more an extension of what we talked about on Monday, rather than moving forward on a whole new topic. The first idea that we talked about was how we chunk or provide meaningful segments of instruction for students in all different types of delivery. We tend to do this when we're talking in a face-to-face class. We'll say, okay, now we're going to talk about this concept, and then you summarize that concept before you move on to the next one. Well, it's the same thing in online. You want to segment them out and provide it separately, rather than just having a long, arduous stream of information that you give to them that they feel overwhelmed with. Second point, replicating or as close to the face-to-face instruction as you would synchronously. And this is also true for today's lesson with regard to assessment, not just instruction. Think about what you do and how you assess students and how you instruct students in a classroom when you're face-to-face, and think about how are you going to deliver the same outcomes, in other words, accomplish the same goals and objectives, but doing it with the tools that you have available in either a synchronous or an asynchronous session, whichever you happen to be either forced to use or have the control to use. The third, understanding the importance of clear, concise, and complete inclusion of purpose and instructions. This is really important also for assessments, as it was for instructional material. You need to think about what you say in class when you're face-to-face to try to describe something, and keep in mind that when you're in class, generally you're also fielding questions and you can give students information. So what you have to, about what they may not understand. So what you have to do in an online class, especially asynchronous, is you have to anticipate what those questions are going to be and try to provide meaningful dialogue either in text or via narrated PowerPoints or videos like we've talked about in the past, but somehow you have to explain to students what they need to do. That's the facilitating student understanding of the instructions. But it's also important, and I think sometimes people miss this, especially in online when they really deal with it probably fairly well or very well in face-to-face, and that is purpose. Tell them why they're doing it and show how that's going to be related to other elements of the course, and also how it's going to be related to the assessments, whether they be formative or summative, and whether they're going to count for grades or not, because obviously our students are interested in that as well. And again, that's the same thing for assessments as it was for instructional materials. Then developing the online lessons that actually include specific elements. Now, when you talk about including video, YouTube videos that you record of yourself teaching in a lecture type of format, narrated slides, supplemental readings like journal articles or handouts that you give them, or any other instructor developed materials, if you're not quite sure about how to incorporate that specifically, in other words, how to keystroke that effectively in Blackboard, you know, any of us can help you with that. So just reach out and we can certainly walk you through it. And even though we're not on campus, we do have Google Meet, just like you're meeting here. So we're hoping that we could take advantage of that platform one-on-one as opposed to one-on-many, and be able to help you in that regard moving forward as well. And then developing lessons that provide different types of instructional strategies you may need to use in your classes, depending on the type of content you're teaching or the nature of the way you teach your content. For example, interactive discussions, or do you want them to do hands-on activities? Are you going to have a major project that's due toward the end of the course that you want to guide them through up to delivery, writing a major paper, any of those elements, or problem solving in math and going from a progression from easy problems to more complex problems, and how you're going to provide that instruction, as well as how you're going to assess students on their understanding of that, which we're getting into today. And then selecting, evaluating, and using appropriate materials. Just because you find something out on YouTube doesn't mean that it's necessarily good. You've got to go through the whole thing yourself, and you got to make sure that it does what you want it to do. In other words, it satisfies your objectives or supplements your lesson in a way that you want to or need to. And sometimes people think that they have to replicate exactly what they did in face-to-face in the same modality. That means if you normally lecture and answer questions, you're going to videotape yourself giving the lecture, and that's the only possibility. Think outside the box. There may be more ways to do it than that. So moving forward today, what we're going to look at are some suggestions for how to design, develop, and grade or not grade, depending on whether it's appropriate to grade, the different types of formative and summative assessments that you may want to include into your course. And we're also going to take a look at an overview, because we won't have time to go into the details because there's so much there, of the Blackboard Grade Center, because that's also related directly, obviously, to assessment. So getting started with some best practices to consider, like we've been doing in the last 4 sessions before today. What we want to do first is, and we kind of passed over this in some of the earlier sessions, but I thought a good time to tie it in would be when we're talking about assessment as an opening concept. And that is how you provide the overview to your students, particularly whenever you're not in real time, face-to-face, or synchronously like we are here. In other words, your asynchronous online instruction, like a fully online course, for example. When you get your template shell that gets delivered to you that's relatively empty for each new course, at the very beginning, there is a week outline and with some suggestions for items that you need to provide as an overview to students. So how is that tied to assessments? Well, what you need to do in that overview, in my opinion, is you need to provide them not just with an overview, but also what they're supposed to gain from that session, from that week or that series of classes or whatever, and also how they are going to need to respond during that week. In other words, what are they going to have to deliver to you? In other words, what are the assessments and how are they going to be graded, and how do those assessments tie to the objectives of your course, which ties to the purpose of your course, which just ties directly to the content of the course for that week. So all those things need to be tied together in summary fashion up front to give them almost like an advance organizer or an overview of what's to come. So this template that's given, that's called a week outline at the beginning, like week 1 outline, week 2 outline, and so on. I'm not sure, but Shannon and Alicia later can speak to this a little bit more clearly. Whenever you're getting an online course approved and they're reviewing materials with you and helping you get it up and running, whether that's a required element or whether it's just highly recommended. But even if you're doing an online course that hasn't gone through RMUR or isn't yet, or it's one of the older ones and that we haven't had an opportunity to put through yet, I still think it's highly recommended that you use this format and provide that to the students up front. So let's take a look at an example of doing that. This is from one of my courses. Again, it's an integrating instructional technology course. This happens to be week 4 of the course. And so I give a very, as you can see on the screen here, a very short overview of what we're going to be talking about this week, because we're in week 4 now. They understand that we have segmented this particular course into a number of course topics. I think there are 7 course topics in 8 weeks that are going to be delivered. So they understand from previous 3 weeks that all the materials are in this course are organized by course topic. So I said first this week we're going to complete, which we had started the previous week, week 3, course topic 2. And then we're also going to begin a new topic this week, topic 3, web resources and online learning. And the next element, as you can see there, are the objectives. So upon completion of this week, you'll be able to. Now we'll talk more about this in another lesson. We can't take the time today to really talk in depth about writing objectives, but I think it's really important. These are not the objectives that were presented in your course syllabus. These are additional, lower level, more detailed objectives that directly tie to one or more of the objectives in your course syllabus. So there are levels of objectives. The first level of objectives would be your program level objectives, for which your course is a part. The second level of objectives would be the objectives you put in your course syllabus, which are fairly general. And then these objectives are for the week within the course that tie back to the course level objectives. So and the reason I'm bringing this up now is because it's important with relationship to tying together the instruction that you expect them to deliver and the objectives you have for them understanding the course material, as well as having objectives that state specifically what they need to deliver, what the assessments are going to be, and how those two things tie together. And the element that ties those two things together are the lower level, more detailed objectives. So you might say, I don't like writing objectives. Well, you know, I teach this, but I don't either. I don't think anybody does. K-12 teachers that have to submit them every week to their administration don't like them either. But what it is, it's an element to show and to guide the thought process and the design of your instruction and your assessments up front, so that it makes it easier for you to deliver material in a more concise and streamlined fashion. So it really does help, you know, teachers at all levels with regard to the ability to write effective objectives. The second part of that, so this would be just an extension of week 4. So I'm giving you the overview here, the objectives, but in addition, you can see the objectives continued at the top there. Also delineate, as was suggested in the template, any readings that you want them to do that week potentially. You can add and delete sections here. Like for example, activities is not one of the ones that's suggested in the template from Blackboard when it's delivered to you, but based on the fact that there are going to be activities that I expect them to do, because this is a hands-on course, I'm going to put an activities section in each one of my weeks in addition to the assignments that are due. So the textbook reading is one of the chapters in the book. The assignment is going to be, as I showed you on Wednesday, that was an assignment where they have short answer questions from tying back to certain key concepts from the chapter. There's going to be an online discussion that they're going to interact with students on, where they're going to be talking about best ways to maybe teach and to get students to understand appropriate online behavior, which is important at all grade levels. And then the activities, the hands-on deliverables that they're going to need to be responsible for this week would be 2. There's going to be a chapter 4 assignment where they're going to develop a lesson plan description. They're going to locate some clip art for use in their courses and handouts that they create. They're going to locate instructional videos as a advanced organizer or an anticipatory set to their lesson plan to open up a lesson for a day. They're going to develop a puzzle using online software. They're going to develop a rubric using online software rubric generators. And they're also going to develop a web quest. And all of that's based on the lessons that they're going to be presented with in the content of Chapter 6. So that just gives them kind of an overview of the whole thing and ties together the assessments with the instructional materials. Here's another one. This is a doctoral course that I teach. This is the overview. Again, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more narrative rather than breaking it down into course concepts because of the type of course it is. And then the objectives are pretty much the same. Notice that some of them relate to better understanding of course material, but some of them say they're going to do something specific, like, for example, develop a meaningful title for their argumentative paper that's going to be due at the end of the course, construct an outline for their argumentative paper, and organize their sources and content for sections within their argumentative paper. And I actually have an assignment where they submit that to me so that I can give them feedback early on before they actually write their paper. So this would be the week when they actually start writing the paper that's due week 8, which gives them 3 weeks then to week 5, 6, 7, and 8, actually 4 weeks to write the paper. Second part of that would be the readings from the 2 textbooks that we have. 3 chapters I'm asking them to read for that week, and the online lessons. Here I delineate the specific online lessons, like the examples I showed you on Wednesday when we were reviewing instructional materials. Suggested review of things that have already been assigned to tie back to the particular topics that we're going to be discussing this week. Then the assignments that they are going to be responsible for, and one of them is very short, journal entry assignment for more like formative assessment, as opposed to assignment 3, which is a graded assignment, more like a summative, but still used some formative. Rick's going to talk about formative versus summative in just a minute. So I'm using those terms, but I think you'll understand a little bit more in just a minute. And then also they have to engage in an online discussion that week. So again, this provides the overview at different levels, but notice that the categories here are just a little bit different based on the nature of the course, the level of the course, what you expect of students during the particular week in this case. So I'm going to turn it over for a few minutes to Rick to talk specifically, as I mentioned, about the concept of formative versus summative assessment. And then I'll just show you a few references that I have down here that we're not going to go through, but I'm going to open them up just to show you, and they'll be available to you on the CIT Blackboard shell. So that if you want to read just a little bit more about formative and summative assessment, the difference between the two, I have 3 handouts that I use with my curriculum design and instructional design courses that I think might be valuable for you to read at some point in the future as well. So Rick, I will stop sharing, or unless you want to leave this up, I don't know if you want me to leave.
No, take it down. I'll put up okay. I have 1 slide I'll just throw up.
Okay, very good.
Okay, is everybody seeing that slide okay? Very good, thank you. All right, if you think about assessment, this is one of those key elements that we all do, and we do it in several different ways in any of our classes. You know, online classes, face-to-face classes, synchronous classes. We are in the process of assessing our students all the time. There's 2 ways that we basically do this. We do this through the formalized process, and we do it through an informal process. Now, the informal process is called formative assessment. The formalized process is called summative. So by definition, the formalized process or summative evaluation happens at the sum of all learning. So when do we do this? When do you do summative evaluations?
Rick, your slide isn't actually showing. We see that you're presenting, but the slide isn't up.
Okay, let's try this again then.
It's loading now.
Now we got it.
There you go. Okay, it changed screens on me is what it did. Okay, so we've got two types of assessment processes. We do formalized processing, which is called summative evaluation. We have informal, which is formative evaluation. So summative happens at the sum of all learning. So basically it happens at the end of a lesson or the end of a series of lessons. The informal or the formative happens during the formation of learning. So if you think about it those ways, that's why we call it informal. So when you look at the formal, there's a couple of things that we do. We do this through written exams. We do this through things like projects, which would also be papers, presentations, anything that you would have students do toward the end of some lesson, something that serves as a culminating activity that pulls things together. We also provide skills exams in certain courses, example, nursing, engineering, anything that has any kind of physical component to it, where a student has to be able to demonstrate something physically. The ability to take a blood pressure, start an IV, or the ability to build something within engineering and bring it to fruition, any of those kind of things. I think there are, when you talk about skills, I think there are mental skills and I think there are physical skills. I think the mental skills may fall along the lines and the ability to create something. John teaches a number of computer-based classes, where he is teaching students COBOL and other languages. I think that is a skill. That is a mental skill. I would argue that math is a mental skill or has many mental skills that are incorporated within it. I think writing and the ability to do that, that's a mental skill. Not as physical as some of the other skills, but they are still skills nonetheless, and they need to be assessed in a certain way, in a different way. So these are the things that we do, and if you think about it, we do them at different points in time. And I guess I would ask you what the purpose is of a summative evaluation. What's the overall purpose here when we give written exams and final projects and skills exams? And sometimes we do this at the end of a week's worth of lessons. We provide quizzes. We do it at the end of, a series of lessons. We do it at the end of the term through midterm exams and final exams. What's the purpose of that? If you had to define it, what's the overall purpose of summative evaluation? Silence.
To determine if course objectives have been reached for each student as an individual.
And thank you, and that was perfect. You're absolutely correct. We're looking to see, did we meet the objectives, and did the student learn the objectives of what it was that we wanted them to learn? Okay, so it's basically they've learned it, we're happy, and they learned it to a certain degree. What happens though if the student doesn't learn it? In other words, what happens if we give them an exam and they fail the exam, or they don't do, they get a 70%? What can we do about it then? In other words, on the final exam, you pass it out and the student comes back and they get a 60% on the exam. What can you do about that? Nothing. At that point, you're just measuring, did the student meet the objectives or not? There's the other part of this evaluation, and that is the formative evaluation. Now, formative evaluation happens through our observations of what students are doing and through questioning techniques that we will use. It happens during the formation of learning, and this is while we are teaching. So this happens every day, all the time. It happens during every class. It happens while we are doing things. And what does this tell us? If I ask a student a question in class and they don't know the answer, what can I do about that? Or if I'm observing that a student, if I'm teaching a skill, for example, and I see that they're not getting it or they're not doing something correctly, what can I do about it now? I can correct it. Okay, and this is part of the teaching process, and this is what informs and drives whether we know that the students are getting the objectives. The summative evaluation tells us, did the student get it? And if they got it, great. If they didn't get it, well, then they're going to have to take the course over, do whatever, because that's not going to really tell us all that much. The formative evaluation tells us during the formation of learning, while we are teaching, are the students understanding what we're talking about, and can I move on to new material? Now, here's a question for you. You have summative evaluation, you have formative evaluation. You see the number of different ways that we can assess these things. Which is more important? Which of these two is more important, summative evaluation or formative evaluation?
Formative.
How many of you think formative? How many of you think summative? How many of you don't know? How many of you don't care? It's a trick question. They are both equally important. And that is absolutely the correct answer. It was a trick question. Summative evaluation is very important. It's, part of our society. We utilize grades as a measurement of what has been learned. So we need to keep record of that throughout all of higher education. Formative evaluation is of equal importance, but that helps us in the teaching process and helps us drive students to move forward. We do that through questioning, through observation, through the term that we utilize a lot of times is checking for understanding. In other words, we are constantly as teachers making sure that students are getting it. And that's what we do. We observe, we question. Now, in a face-to-face, that's a certain dynamic that happens. We generally do that just through questioning and observation. And sometimes it's a little nebulous and we're not always sure that we're reading what we think we're reading. In an online format, we have some different opportunities. In fact, in many respects, I think we have greater opportunity for formative evaluation. If you think about this, all of the things, the activities that we're going to have students do in our online classes, discussion boards, communications with emails, any journalizing that we have them do, any blogs that we have them work through, any kind of short-term assignments that we're doing to help them to understand the learning, or any kind of question and answer kind of things that you do, these now become very tangible records. So think about this a second. When you provide a discussion in a face-to-face class, generally, and we'll talk more about this on Friday, you generally get a few people that will participate in the discussion. But in an online discussion, everybody participates. So in that face-to-face discussion, I can only really understand through observation and questioning and listening to what they're saying that a handful of students may or may not be getting something, and I make an assumption that the rest are or aren't. But in an online course, in an online discussion, or a blog, or a wiki, or a journal, or through email, I now have a text-based tangible record that basically tells me what my students know. Now, it takes a lot more time to assess this, so I'm reading their posts, I'm reading their discussions, and I get a generalized understanding that they do or do not understand a concept. If they do, I say, great, you've got it, keep moving. If they don't understand something, what's my next step? I can now intervene with them. So this is where, and what we'll talk about on Friday, is more one-on-one kind of instruction in a formative manner that tells me, Johnny Smith doesn't understand this concept, so I need to spend a little time one-on-one with him to help him to get that. These are all opportunities, and the key element is really developing interaction. You want to check for understanding, you want to assess whether your students are getting it, and I'll be honest with you, it's a little bit more work, but it's a little easier sometimes because you've got that tangible record to formatively evaluate your online students. So, comments or questions in regard to this? Okay, if not, John, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate that. Let me just get my screen back up here. Can everyone see my screen? I just want to be sure before I continue. Is it okay? Okay, very good. All right, yeah. What I'm going to try to do as we move through some examples here is build on what Rick said with regard to showing you where something might be considered formative assessment or summative assessment. And in some cases, you'll even see an example of something that might be classified as both. And I'll point that out as I said we go through here. One of the things that's really important, just to add on to what Rick said about the online discussions, and we'll talk more about this as he mentioned on Friday, because that's going to be a big part of online discussions, a big part of asynchronous teaching. So we need to really delve into that a little bit more, and that's one of the goals of Friday's session. But is really the quality of the way you ask them to respond. In other words, you won't be able to formatively assess whether they're understanding if you don't ask the right questions. It depends on the way in which you formulate your initial and posts that they put up and how you ask them to respond to others through their reply posts, but we'll talk about that more. Also notice that on my slide up here right now with regard to formative assessment, one other thing, there is a lot of software available that can help you do things that weren't available maybe 10 years ago. For example, one of the things you want to do, I do most frequently, we all do most frequently face-to-face in class that Rick mentioned was questioning. You can just stop something and say, okay, does everyone understand? Or so-and-so, do you want to, recap what I just said so that we can, get a sense of understanding here from your group or their group if you're working in groups and so on. But you don't have that luxury in an asynchronous online course. One of the software packages that are availability now, even through the cloud and through the web, and use of cell phones in class, and this could be an appropriate use, would be the use of IRSs or interactive response systems, sometimes referred to previously as clickers before cell phones were adaptable through the cloud and through the web-based stuff, where you can actually set up ahead of time questions that you think are pertinent for them to understand, and then they use their cell phone to answer, and then you can see the results on the screen of how they answered the question, and then get a real quick assessment in real time when you're delivering in the classroom or when you're delivering synchronously via online. So those are just some other things to consider. Whether you want to grade or not grade, people think of using Blackboard test system for large-scale exams. Also think about it potentially as setting up a short 5-question quiz and have them go in and take the quiz. Or have them go in and give them a whole lot of advanced questions that like practice questions before they take a major exam. And let them, through Blackboard testing, you can have them do it as many times as they want. You can scramble the questions. There's all kinds of things you can do with Blackboard testing. It doesn't have to be only for summative assessment. You can use that as a tool for formative assessment as well. So again, when we move into a session where we're going to talk more about testing and specifically, then we will go delve into all of those items and areas and ways in which we can use some of the tools in Blackboard in asynchronous session for both formative and summative assessment at the same time. Okay, so let's just continue on here so that we can see some specific examples. First thing I want to mention is that when we went back, when we were forced to go online, all of us in March, we were scrambled for a weekend and a half or so to try to put together some training for people for the things that they would need most frequently. And I don't know if you remember this, some of you may have, Gavin Buxton and I put together a Google Hangout session like this, where we invited everyone to talk about testing and how to use Blackboard test system. And that video is still up on the CIT Blackboard shell, so it's still available. I realized through that video that we went pretty fast and that we didn't cover everything in detail. So what I did after the fact for the next several weeks after that is I developed a set of instructional modules, CAI, computer assisted instruction modules, to walk you through how to build a test in Blackboard, how to import a Word document with questions in it into Blackboard. There's a 3-series set of CII modules that that I have developed that a little bit later that you can actually go through on your own, that will give you a lot of I think hopefully insight into how to work those. If you have questions on those, I give you resources to look at the end of each one of those CAI modules, in addition to suggesting that you reach out to us for further instruction. But it's at least a starting point, and I think it will get you up and running for those of you that have never worked with Blackboard test system before. So what I'm going to do right now is simply break out of this for a minute. And I'm going to bring up Blackboard. And here's the CIT Center. So I want to show you exactly where this is so that you can get to it. If you go down under Teaching Resources, as you can see on this screen, if you go to Testing, Exams Online, and click, there's a little bit of an introduction here. There's some tips and best practices for online testing that you can go through. There's a folder here that we put up called Creating and Managing Blackboard Tests. And it says this folder contains instructional resources for faculty who desire to learn about more about providing online tests using Blackboard. There are tutorials here and so on. And then for those of you that want to do and learn more about how to do tests live, in real time, where it's necessary to really control and have a closed book test, you like for maybe a final exam, or where it's used around campus a lot is in the nursing program, because they have to take certain types of exams in practice for certification, and their NCLEX exams, I believe that they're called. You may want to know about a couple of add-on products that the university has purchased for Blackboard that you can use from a company called Respondus, and that involves the lockdown browser, where you force their computers in real time to stay focused and into taking the test, and they can't go out until they finish the test. And also Respondus monitoring, where you can actually use their video cameras, and you can ask them to do things like clear off their desks at home or wherever they're taking the test, and you can actually see what they're doing while they're taking the test, so that you can monitor it in real time, as well as it's recording it, so you can go back and see it later if you want so choose for to see if there was any cheating or what have you. It's not a totally foolproof way of preventing cheating, but it certainly does help. So that's where you would find more information about Respondus. But let me just show you in the Creating and Managing Blackboard Tests that this is the recorded video that Gavin and I did back in I believe it was March. I think it was March 31st, if I'm not mistaken. But you can just click on it. It's a YouTube video that you can see, and we walk you through that. And then here are the three modules that I was talking about before. Module 1, Module 2, Module 3. The first is how to simply create a Blackboard test, set up for a Blackboard test, set up the canvas for it. Second one is creating and editing test questions, how to build multiple choice questions, true false questions in particular, but there are other types that I walk you through as well. And then the third module shows you how to actually import test questions from a Word document. If you already have your questions built in a Word document, how do you import those into Blackboard and use them without having to retype them all in one by one, as you would do in Module 2 with creating and editing test questions. So again, those modules are available, and I just wanted to take a moment to show you where that information was available, since this is a session on assessment, and I'm not going to walk you through all of that right now, but do want to, let's see, I'm going to open up one of these just to real quickly show you it. And what I did was I built these in Blackboard. So you can, when you open them up and in Blackboard from the CIT Blackboard shell, if you should so choose. You can see how they were put together and created. And I used linking in Blackboard to make it into a CAI module, and also put the voiceovers. This is a voiceover. It's not just a bunch of screens in a row, but I actually explain the steps as we're going through here in all of these. And the explanation that you would find in the link here, the voiceover link, is also down here. So it's also closed captioned for those that might need it. So anyway, going into this, I don't know if you can hear that, if there's any echoing. It's not usually good to try to do via Google Meet a third-party voiceover, but this is a voiceover, and you can see I just simply take you through. You can see exactly how to start, how to build a test. It takes you through step by step while you're in Blackboard, and each one of these icons is a voiceover. So I'm not going to go through that. I explain what they are, but please, if you're interested in that, take some time to look through those. Those are available up to you for you right now. Also, I might mention that that based on what has already been communicated with regard to our fall semester, we are going to be going into a 15-week semester, but the last 2 weeks are going to, after Thanksgiving, are going to be remote delivery. So the week immediately after Thanksgiving will be remote instruction for the last week of the term. And then the following week after that is final exam week. So you're going to, probably at some point at least, many of you will be scrambling for, how am I going to test? Even if I didn't use the formal testing mechanism throughout the semester, how am I going to do it and use it in the last week of the semester, maybe for delivery of a last exam or a final exam or what have you. And so these resources, I think, would be important for you to go through that would help you with that. Before I move on to more examples of other types of assessment, let me stop there and ask if there are any questions or anybody wants to make any comments about anything related to testing, specifically, particularly in an asynchronous, fully online environment. Any questions or concerns before we move on? Okay. Now, this next slide that I have up here is an example of how you would do this. In other words, if you're giving an online exam, let's say it's a midterm exam like this one that I used in my 6110 Integrating Instructional Technology course in the past when it was fully online. The importance, I think I mentioned on Monday when we were together, was, and Rick and I both tried to emphasize this, is that you're not there. You have to be very explicit with your students and give them really robust instructions so that they know exactly what to do. So rather than just putting a link for a test out there and say, here you go, take the test, I think what you want to do is you want to give them description. So here is an example of descriptive test right where you build the test. So you can see the icon for the test as the students would see it. This is the underlined link where they would actually click on to take the test, but they need to read this first. So I gave them a lot of information, like you can take the exam anytime between this time and this time, but it has to be completed before here. Also note that once you begin it, you'll have exactly 1.5 hours or 90 minutes to complete it. And then if you don't, it will close you out automatically, and it'll keep your stuff, but you won't have an opportunity to answer the rest of the questions. It'll be graded based on what you've submitted at that point. To begin the exam, it's going to be 50 questions with a total value of 50 points. They're going to be multiple choice and true and false. You won't have enough time to look up answers to all of them, so you're going to have to be familiar with the material ahead of time. What I do, and this is just my way of dealing with online testing in many courses, is rather than trying to lock down the browser and trying to do it in real time and set up a specific time where people get locked out. If it's not a course that's critical, like a nursing course where they're practicing for certain kinds of exams in a timed way, I will make my tests open book. And I will also make them open book, open notes. But what I do is to try to control somewhat is I give them a limited amount of time. Like once they start the exam, they only have, in this case, as you can see, an hour and a half, which I know full well that based on the kind of questions I have in there, there's no way that they can look up all 50 questions in an hour and a half and answer them. So, so they're going to have to be more familiar with the material than that, or prepare for the exam by bookmarking their notes and their textbook and so on, so they know where important information is. So in case they have a need for a few that they don't understand, they can look them up. That's just one approach that you could potentially take, and it just makes it a little more flexible for students, particularly whenever you're in an asynchronous online course and they can't all be available at the same time to take an exam potentially. Just one idea. Again, as you can see at the bottom of the screen here, online exam, asynchronous, open book, but time limited. But you give all those instructions to them up front. And in the modules that I just mentioned before, I show you step by step in Blackboard exactly how to set the parameters so that each one of those things can be done. In other words, how do you limit it to an hour and a half? I show you how to do that. How do you set the dates? Like you can only do it between here and here. I show you how to do that. All those settings are relatively easy, but you have to know how to do it and where to go. So, you know, I do that for you in those sessions. This is another example in a different course. This is in my COBOL programming course. And because in COBOL programming, there's theory, but the vast majority of what I want to test them on is, do you know how to apply? And do you know how to write code? And do you know how to logically think about designing certain things in programming? So I give in this case, a two-part exam. And the first part is the same scenario that I just described, where it would be objective type questions such as multiple choice, true, false, so they have the theoretical background. But the second part of the exam is really short answer, extended response, producing some code, like vignettes of code for certain sections of a program and so on. And so what I do, I break it down into two parts, and I use the testing system in Blackboard for the first part, the objective part. And then I just use routine things like a Word document, and I build a template for them to answer questions directly in for the open response. Now, you can also do that using Blackboard test system, because there are options for essay questions and so on to be built in there. I personally find it easier for the second half of the test to do it in a Word document and have them upload their Word document. And what I do in that case is it takes them a lot longer to do that kind of a thing. I give them a full day. I'll say, okay, I'm going to open it up next Wednesday from 7 a.m. to midnight, and you have all day to do this. But it closes out at midnight, and you cannot upload the exam part 2 anytime after that. And so there's a way in Blackboard, obviously, to restrict submission so that they can only submit it once, and they can only submit it within that time frame. So there are lots of ways that, and I'm just trying to provide you with a lot of different examples of how you can use Blackboard in different ways to do some testing, where you don't even, in some cases, necessarily have to be all that familiar, like in the case of part 2 of this exam, with the Blackboard testing system. You can do it using Word and having students submit it as they would submit an assignment, even though it would be called a test. And I think someone previously asked about how you could change the category of something from an assignment to a test, and we do have an answer for that, and we'll be dealing with that when we get into the Grade Center. Any questions on this second example of how to do testing?
John, Ahmed had a question. Gavin did a good job of answering it, but didn't know if you had anything else to add there.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see it. So yeah, what was the question?
How do you deal with special needs students as far as the time frame is concerned?
Yeah, I do address that in the modules that I put up there, and I show you exactly how the settings in Blackboard test system can be set. So you can do it on a case-by-case basis with individual students. So even though you set it up for, let's say, 90 minutes, an hour and a half for everyone, you can go in and say, for this particular student, I want to extend that to 2 hours and 2 hours and a half, 2.5 hours. You could do it for not just one student. You could do it if you have 3 students in your class. You can also do it that way as well. So there's definitely ways to do that, and it's not all that hard to do. So the Blackboard test system does accommodate for special needs.
John?
Yes.
Hi, good morning.
Hi,
Is there a limitation on size of files that they can upload?
I have never run into a problem. However, if they're graphic or they're got a lot of JPEGs in or that type of thing, it may take a little longer to upload, download. And by the way, uploading and downloading in Blackboard is limited to certain file types.
Oh, what are they?
Yeah, I don't know them off the top of my head, but JPEG is one of them. But what I was going to mention is that that's easily overcome. And the way you do that is by any file types you have, you can just give directions to your students to put them into a folder. And then what you do is you zip that folder.
Okay.
And a zip file is one of the ones that can be uploaded and downloaded very easily with Blackboard.
Okay. We use specialized software like Illustrator and Photoshop, and mainly InDesign and Illustrator, and some interactive programs. So
you can, Ferris, you can download.
Yeah, you can do that. You can upload and download those, but it's just that whoever's receiving it is going to, it'll come up, if it doesn't recognize it as a file type that will open automatically on your computer, it'll say, what do you want to open this with?
Yeah.
Would it be better to save to the drive?
I'm sorry?
Would it be better to save to the drive? Because that accepts very large files.
Yeah, there's or to Google Drive. Yeah, that's another option. And then you could go there and download. Yeah, there's some that would be considered outside of Blackboard a workaround though, for sure.
Right.
Sure. I mean, you can. The only hassle with uploading and downloading files of large size like that is just simply the amount of time that it takes based upon your bandwidth, the student's bandwidth. Especially when you're working from home, those are maybe a little smaller than when we're on campus. And as John was saying, as long as you have, the software on your computer to read them, there's no hassle with that. And the students have to have access to that same software. Other than that, you really have no limitations. I would make a statement though, that every one of your Blackboard shells has a limit of 1.6 gigs. Now, that's a lot of space. Okay, and it takes a lot to fill that up and to do it. I did it this last summer only because I copied a whole bunch of stuff over from other courses. I wanted to show examples of other students' work, their students. But that was a rarity to get to that point. And it just depends on something like MP4 files are extremely large and will take up a lot of space. But you should be okay with what you're doing, Ferris.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
I noticed that in assignments, when students submit by attaching files, I can download the whole bunch in one go on Blackboard, but I couldn't do that with submitted files and tests. Is there another way to download everything in one go, or do I have to do it one by one?
Within a test, did you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in some tests, a question requires file upload.
I'm not familiar with that, so I'm not going to be able to answer that. I'm sorry, Alicia or Rick or Shannon, do you know for sure? I've never run into that, never had.
I believe if you're setting it up that way as file uploads, you can't batch file download. You have to download them individually because you have to go into their individual areas in the gradebook.
So is there another option to use rather than file upload in the test?
I'm not exactly sure what you're doing. Are you having the students upload something, upload a document?
The test is like they have some short answer questions, and at the end they also have some kind of a programming question that they have to upload their files so I can check them out. In assignment submissions, there is an option. I just click on that. I can download all the files, but in a test like this one, I couldn't.
Exactly. I don't know of any option for testing.
I don't either. I believe that has to
I
be
think
done
that's individual.
individually.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. That's fine. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Okay, anybody else have questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
In the March and May, when we talk about how to develop the test using the Word file, I remember we have used a website to convert the Word file to test file and generate the zip file for uploading. But when I prepare my final exam in May, I found that the website is invalid now. So do you have any other suggestion?
Yeah, I think I corrected that. What happened was that the university that put up that test generator software took it down. So we found another one, and I have incorporated that other one into the CAI modules. Now, as far as I know, and I haven't tested it recently, it worked, but I will double check and test it again to see if it did. What I think what you're talking about is in the one module where you're trying to import from a Word document, and
that's what I talked about. Yeah, but I found the website is invalid, so it's really hard to convert a Word file to a test file and to generate a test using the approach we have talked about in that CIT series seminar.
Yeah, so let me double check that, the links to that particular website, which I haven't done for a couple months, and see if it's still available. And if it is, it should work. And if it isn't, then we'd have to modify that and put a different link in to be able to do it. Unfortunately, Blackboard is not good about providing a tool like that. You can do it. Gavin and I talked about that in the video, but it requires a little bit of finesse with regard to building either a notepad file or a Excel spreadsheet to be able to import it in the format that Blackboard would accept. What these third-party softwares that universities have put out are a workaround. In other words, what they do is they take your raw information from your Word document and they do the converting into a spreadsheet or into a notepad format for you automatically, and then allows it to automatically be generated and imported directly into Blackboard. But you know, we're relying on some coding that universities have at their control through their teaching and learning centers. And if they decide not to make it available to the general public, they can take it down at any time. So that's the problem we run into with that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. And like I said, I'll double check that and we will try to get that certainly up and running and making sure you have an active link before the semester begins. Okay, any other questions regarding testing? Okay, what I wanted to do is show you that with regard to this example, this is a separate entity that comes before the next two screens. So what I do is I give them an overview, maybe several weeks in advance of what the test is going to be about. This is not the link to the test. Notice that there's no link up here. So I just say requirements for taking exam 2, and I give it to them ahead of time so they can read through that so they know what's coming. And then during the week that they're going to take the test, then I open up these links, the link for actually taking exam 1 part 1, and open up the link for taking exam 2 part 1 and exam 2 part 2. So it's kind of a 3-module thing here, where the first one is simply an item. When you go to build it, it's just building an item, giving them information. This one is building an exam, and this one is building an assignment, the way I have it set up. So you would do 3 different things here when you're actually in there building it. So for example, just to take a look at this exam 2 part 2 online, this would be kind of bypassing the Blackboard test system and saying, I'm going to do this with a Word document. So this is their exam part 2. And what I've done here is simply build a Word document and said, here's some short answer items. What's wrong with this field definition? They have to give an explanation, or here, develop a valid compound condition with an implied subject based on what I gave them here. What's wrong with this working storage code? They have to explain it. Here they have to actually rewrite some code based on this example. And I use red here, obviously, to show them where they have to insert their answers for each one of these different short answer questions. I can have them fill in values in tables. I can use diagrams and have them fill in little areas for how they're going to, label each one of their paragraphs in a procedure division of a COBOL program. They can convert an if statement into an evaluate statement. Lots of different things I can have them do here, but I find it difficult to do all that in the Blackboard test system, or it would take me forever to do it. And so I figure it's easier to simply do it in a Word document, put it up as an assignment, have them download it. I'm sorry, I download it, excuse me. I grade them, and then I upload them back with feedback, where I can obviously use the review pane in Word and insert comments anytime I want to throughout the document, as well as you can see here, give them points. So what I would do in this case, if it was correct, I simply go in here and I put 2/2 out of 2. And then I keep going through here as I grade it, and then I go out and count all the points, and then I come up here and I'll say, okay, you got 40 out of 43 to get the thing back, and then manually record the graded Blackboard when I give that back, that feedback. So that's how another way that you could work with testing in Blackboard, where you don't necessarily have to use the Blackboard test system. So I just thought I would show that as an example. Hopefully that's meaningful. All right. Ready for some more examples, I hope? Okay, of assessments in general, because not everything we do with regard to assessments of students has to do with tests. We could have assignments, we could have journal entries, we could use online discussions, as we mentioned before. We might give research paper assignments, we might have hands-on activities, we might have either individual or group projects that students have to do. So the first thing we're going to look at, and this overlaps a little bit with what we did on Monday, but we're looking at it more from the assessment perspective than we did on Monday from the instructional perspective. Assignments with or without the use of Word document templates. So let's look at that first. Here's an example of giving an assignment with the use of a Word document instructions. So the instructions then become very short in Blackboard. You have to, I think you should tell them a little bit about, you got to click here to submit the assignment. But what you do is you put the lion's share of the information that they need to accomplish inside a Word document. And then you simply attach the Word document. So if I click here, it's going to bring up the Word document for the students, and it's going to tell them total points, when it's due, the written assignment instructions, as well as giving them the grading rubric for this particular assignment. This is an annotated bibliography. This assignment is quite lengthy. It's going to end up being about 35 pages each for each student to submit. But I explain that here. I don't think you'd want to take all of this information and put it all in stream in Blackboard. It just becomes very wordy, cumbersome. So this makes it much more streamlined. And the other thing that's nice about this is then they can download this Word document, keep it on their computer, and then they can access it as they're working through the annotated bibliography anytime they want. Go back and look at the rubric without necessarily having to go into Blackboard and so on. So just another idea for how you might want to submit a graded assignment or work with a graded assignment. This is what, when you have it like this and they do click on assignment to annotated bibliography, this is what comes up for the students. So this is what they see. It summarizes for them the date it's due, the points possible. It also reiterates the instructions that you had given them right here in Blackboard. It obviously doesn't open the Word document for them, but it gives them the instructions. And it says that there was an attachment. And then the second part of that, because this is all one long stream, I couldn't fit it all on one screen here for you to see because I wanted to make it large enough so you could actually see it. This is a continuation. So what the students would do then is they would simply, rather than clicking on write submission to answer the assignment, they would click on attach files, browse my computer right here, and they would attach the Word document back and submit it. And sometimes people give me comments and say things like, well, was this a wonderful assignment? Not usually, but they could do something like that if they wanted to, and then click submit. So that's how students actually submit the assignment whenever you use the Word document template. Any questions on the first? I'm just going to go down through these and give you an example of each one of these as we as ideas for you to kind of maybe build on with your own content, depending on the nature of the courses that you're trying to, put online or do synchronously, or develop some assignments and assessments that you might want them to do, even using Blackboard for a face-to-face course, for example, which I do all the time. I have, for example, my COBOL students, even though I teach it face-to-face almost not all the time, actually, I have them also submit all their assignments in Blackboard. In addition to sometimes I have them print out some things when we're in class and submit them that way too. So for a journal entry, if you want to utilize the journal entry, it's very similar. You build it as a journal entry, though you don't build it as an assignment. And there's a special link in the course content, or the assessments link, that says journal entries that you can build from. We can show you that a little bit later when we get into Blackboard itself. But this would be what I would refer to as a graded, formative, reflective assignment or assessment. What I mean by that is that it's formative because what it does in this particular case, if you read through that, it says, okay, now based on the fact that you read the materials I gave you and asked you to read, and you went through the online lessons already that I've given to you asynchronously, what did you find most important to assist you with writing your argumentative paper coming up, and also for your dissertation? Like, what did you put it into either a list or a set of paragraphs or something, what you found most valuable? Then I can at least rest assured that they look through the material somewhat, as opposed to just kind of ignoring it, going right to the assignment and bypassing all my lessons. But in order to make sure they do it, usually doctoral students are no different than any other students. They won't do it unless it's graded. So what I do is I give a minimal, like 10 points or something, to the journal entry assignment compared to the point value of other assignments, but I do go in and check it. So when they click to actually submit this is what they see. So it's again a repeat of the instructions, but they can also, get rid of the instructions by clicking this up arrow right here where I'm pointing. And when they're ready to actually submit it, they simply click on Create Journal Entry. And then they have the same kind of submission box that you would have seen with submitting an assignment. And the ability to also upload, like if they decide they want to do their journal entry in a Word document, they can attach the Word document. And then when I go to grade it, by going over here and pulling down this menu with a list of all the students that have submitted their journal entry, I can simply click on it, and it'll say, attached file. I open up the attached file by double clicking on it. I read it, and then I put the grade right in here. So I'm grading it as I'm going through the journals one at a time, which is not all that difficult to do. Any questions on journal entries before we move on to online discussion? And we're not going to talk a lot about online discussions here. I'm just going to briefly go through it because we're going to really delve into this more on Friday. But anything on either the first two? Okay, then looking at an assignment, here's an assignment for an online discussion. And again, you're going to see it's wordy, but that's because you've got to really articulate for them what you will expect from them, or you're going to get crap, basically, as we've all experienced. Because if you just make it too general, they're going to just kind of give you whatever, or they're going to say to other people in reply posts, "Oh, nice work," and that type of thing. That's meaningless. You've got to really articulate specifically what you want them to do, and you have to, in my opinion, designate the difference between what you expect them to do in their initial post for consideration by others in the class versus what you want them to do in their reply posts. Alicia or Shannon's going to talk a little bit more about rubrics a little later, and I do it a non-conventional way, and I think it's to my detriment because I think it takes me longer to grade things than what it should. So I'm looking forward to their discussion because I started building things in Blackboard before the rubric feature in Blackboard was really as robust as it is now. And so it was really cumbersome years and years ago. So I developed my own system of building rubrics and working it out, which is what I use. So I build my rubrics in a Word document and then copy them the tables right in from Word into is the Blackboard, as you can see here. And then what I do is when I'm grading, I simply copy that rubric into everybody's return, and then I fill out the rubric. It takes a little bit of time, I admit, but it enables me to give feedback in the rubric as well as additional comments right below the rubric. It's another way of doing it, but I think Alicia and Shannon's going to show you maybe a more streamlined way by using the actual rubric feature itself. But we'll talk more about the setting up of the online discussions and how you can use them on Friday. We'll have Shannon and Alicia talk more about the rubrics and how to build them, not just for online discussions, but for any or all of your assessments that you decide to use in Blackboard, should that need to be. Okay, and then here we have another example of an online discussion, so that when you go back through the video or you go back through the examples of the PowerPoint slides that we're going to put up on the Blackboard CIT shell, you'll be able to look at some examples again. Now, with this particular one, this is from a doctoral course, and what I did here is I'm building up to something, and this online discussion is actually part of what they're going to do and get peer feedback and my feedback prior to them actually submitting an assignment. So it's a part of their assignment that they're going to be submitting in Blackboard to get peer and instructor feedback prior to actually submitting the assignment, which I think is a good way of getting formative assessment built into your course as well. So this was an online discussion called Argumentative Paper Title and Thesis Statement. One of the things I'm asking for in an assignment is in week 5 is for them to propose what the title of their argumentative paper due week 8 is going to be, to also give the 1 or 2 sentence thesis statement in their paper, and to give a rough outline of the major sections that they're going to divide the 15-page paper into, called an outline. So those are the 3 things that they're going to get feedback on during week 5. And so they'll still have another 3.5 weeks or so to write the paper after they get this feedback from both peers as well as from me as the instructor. So the previous example was, well, we'll see that coming up. I'm sorry, the journal assignment in a minute. The grading rubric for this particular one, this online discussion, I separated it out here because it was too large. The whole thing was too large for the screen and you wouldn't be able to see it. But notice that I actually break it down into component pieces based on what I asked them to do in the initial and reply posts, so that I can ensure that they do an adequate job with both pieces. And I reiterate in a more concise way from the overall instructions in a more summarized fashion in the rubric, so that they know exactly what they're going to be graded on. It really helps give them structure to their responses in the online discussions. Okay, now the next item, anybody have any questions on that before I move on? Okay, the next is graded formative assessment, I call it, because formative assessment can be informal or formal, and I consider a little more formal when it's graded, or they do too, because there are just points associated with it. But I already explained in an asynchronous class why it's necessary often to do that, because they take it more seriously. So here's an assignment from that same doctoral class, week 5. It's their argumentative paper outline, where they're going to be giving 3 things. And here's the Word document that I submit for that assignment so that they can actually, here's the instructions for what they need to submit. Here's the rubric that I'm going to use for grading that particular assignment. And I actually give them areas for where they have to type their responses. They're going to give me a focused problem area for their paper. They're going to give me a proposed title, proposed thesis statement, and then they're going to build an outline for the paper. And this is the actual formal assignment based on 50 points that they're going to submit at the end of the week, at end of week 5, to get my formative assessment, so that they have my perspective on what they're doing for their paper before they actually do a whole lot of work on the paper. So that's the assignment. And here is integrating the instruction, the assignment, and pulling it all together. So if you bear with me for just 1 second, I'm going to go into Blackboard, and I'm going to go to the doctoral class that I'm currently teaching, week 5. And you're going to see that the way I organized it here for week 5 for them, here's the outline, the objectives, everything that they need to do. And then I built 2 separate folders. Right now in my online doctoral class that I'm currently teaching, I also have synchronous sessions each week to meet with them, but the majority of it is asynchronous. So what I do is I separate out into 2 different folders. The first folder says, okay, for Thursday, July 23rd, this is what we did this past week. Online class meeting agenda, please review prior to the meeting. So when I met with them as a group last Thursday, I expected them to click on this and go through each one of these things. And I also gave them the link for joining the synchronous session. Going back to the second folder, which is the items to be completed before the end of the week, which I have everything due each week on a Sunday. This is what the 8 items they're supposed to do for that week. I gave them a suggested review of previous material, the reading assignments from the 2 required textbooks for the week, an online lesson teaching them more about academic writing, where I explain where in each one of those chapters the important information about that is. I also give them some additional items for them to look at, like reading a handout, reviewing a web page, and looking through Harvard's Guide to Using Resources from Harvard University, which I think are excellent resources. Then another online lesson, developing a strong thesis statement and using Purdue OWL's take on how to write a thesis statement, several videos that I think do a good job, as well as a handout that I put together on how to do that. And then another lesson on writing the argumentative paper itself, how to organize it and so on, videos and handouts. So they're supposed to do all this first. Then if they did all of these online lessons, then I want to double check them. This is the journal entry that I just previously showed you. So you can see it in sequence. Right after they do the lessons, I have them do the journal entry where they tell me what elements from what they just digested is going to be most important to them moving forward as they write their paper. Then this is the online discussion I just showed you as well in sequence after number 6, number 7, where they actually develop the title for their paper, they develop the thesis statement, and they develop the outline. They share it with their peers, they share it with me through the graded online discussion. And then at the end of the week, they also submit the actual paper, which I just showed you. So I have already shown you this. I showed you the online discussion, the journal entry, but they all relate to this specific week's worth of work in the doctoral course for week 5. Based on them having gone through the lessons that I'm showing here. So you can kind of see it in context a little bit better than just looking at each one of these assessments independently. Because as I mentioned before, the assessments are really tied directly to your instructional materials, or they should be. And if they're not, then there's a disjointing of your goals and objectives for not only the week, but probably for the whole course. So, okay, I'll back out of here and I'll go back into into the slides. I'm out of sequence, so just bear with me here until I get back to the slide. We talked about assignments. We talked about journal entries, online discussions. There's the journal entry that I just showed you. There's the online discussion that I just showed you from that doctoral course. Here's the full-blown version of it, and then the graded assignment. Here I want to show you, as the next thing is integrating instruction, pulling it all together. Those were the two folders that I just took you through. This was the outline. These were the two folders in that online class that I just mentioned, where the items to be completed are both instruction and assessment. Now, in terms of a research paper, that same course again, remember I mentioned that it would be due week 8. So if you go to week 8, this is what the students will see. There'll be a lesson that they go through right before they're ready to submit the paper. And then they will have the submitting of the actual paper week 8, the last week of the course, where it'll be graded and then returned to them. But backing up here, the lesson right before the submission of the paper, the first thing I do is, and this is because part of the goals for this course is to teach them how, or reinforce for them, I guess I should say, how to use APA 7.0. This is the first time that we're introducing 7.0, so that's why we're beating it a little bit harder, because they are used to using 6.0 up to this point, and this is the first time that they're introduced to 7.0. So what I did is I developed what is referred to as an argumentative paper template, where I set up the margins and the line spacing and the font size and the fonts to be used and so on, so that they can use this as a template to write their paper. So they open up this document and they can simply put their title page here, and they'd have to look up how to format it using the lesson I already took them through, because if they go to Purdue OWL, there's a video as well as a demonstration of how to build your argumentative paper title page following APA 7.0, which like I said, have already had them go through in the lesson. So I just say title page here. Page 2 is where they put their abstract. Third page is where they put their table of contents. And then I actually have already set up for them how they put their paper title, their first heading, second heading level, third heading level, as they use APA 7.0 according to the formatting. And I've used it based on heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 styles, so that it's all set up for them ready to actually submit their paper. And I actually walk them through a lesson on this prior to this. This is just a review right before they're ready to submit their paper. And I point them to week 8 back in week 5 when they're first starting their paper, so that they can start by using the template. Then I also gave them examples of previously written papers, so that they could see on other topics how they were formatted and submitted by students. And then I also gave them a formatting student paper document. So student research paper format, APA 7.0, how overview, the title page, the abstract. I use it in general for anybody who's writing a research paper with APA 7.0. But the assessment piece comes right after that, where they actually submit the assignment. I give them an assignment sheet, but notice that there's no place for them to type anything into here, because they're going to submit the paper. Obviously, they're not going to submit this. But I do give them the rubric. So I give them a full-blown rubric of what I'm looking for in the paper, telling them how their paper is going to be graded. And then what I do when they submit their paper is I simply take this rubric like this, and I copy it, and I paste it into their document right after their title page, and I fill this out as I grade their papers, and then I submit them back to them. So that's another way of being able to work with an assessment when it's a little bit more involved and it's a research paper assignment. And the last two, I already gave you on week, let me think, Monday session, excuse me, wasn't last week, and gave you instructions with integrated assessments. So I'm not going to take time right now to do these. So that's my demonstration. I know it was long, I'm sorry. I wanted to get through as many examples as I could so that you could see how to do those, and give you some ideas for how you could build your own content into maybe using some of those, or maybe to spawn some ideas from that you could tailor to your needs. The next thing, though, we wanted to show you is how to work with rubrics, and using the Blackboard rubric feature for various types of assignments it can be a really neat feature. So I'm going to turn it over to, I think it's Alicia, correct? Who's going to kind of walk you through that. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then Alicia can present now.
Okay, thanks, John. This is really great information. I'm going to go ahead and share my Blackboard screen. Let me know when y'all see it. You seeing my Blackboard screen now?
Yep.
Good. Okay, flipping back to it. So I'm going to do 4 things depending on time. We're going to build a new rubric from the control panel. That's one way you can build rubrics. I'm also, though, going to show you how to build a rubric within an assignment. So that's a second way that you can kind of build rubrics. I'm also going to show you how to associate rubrics that maybe you've already previously built in Blackboard with an assignment. So that's another thing. And then John talked a little bit about grading inside of rubrics or with rubrics in Blackboard. So I want to show you that because that's a really neat feature, and it allows for lots of feedback for the students as it's associated with points or without. And then if we have time, I also want to just quickly show you what a student sees then when you've graded an assignment with a finished rubric from the student view. So
Alicia, before you continue, I just might want to mention that rather than rushing through it, do as many as you can, and then if we want to break in about 15 minutes, we can pick up where we're left off here and continue this on to Friday's session, and we can tailor Friday's session so that when we're talking about the Grade Center, you could do rubrics, and then Rick was supposed to talk today about the Grade Center in detail, so we can incorporate that into Friday as well, because I think those are 2 really important concepts. And then I'll focus also on Friday on online discussions, and then maybe minimize some of the things about blogs and wikis and so on that aren't used quite as frequently. So Rick, if you feel that that's a doable plan, since we're kind of going over time a little bit here, I think we could do that, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay.
I'm going to make it easier so that we just don't go too far over time with all of this. I think it's just a lot to absorb, as everybody's kind of understanding. It's just a lot to absorb within a short period. Just a general comment. Ann made a question: how long does it take you to prepare and post content for each week? And my answer would be, to that, it takes a fair amount of time. That's what this is all about. It does take some initial production time, as you're starting to see. But there is a silver lining to this. Once you have your course shell developed, and once you have all of your materials developed, it's there. I'm not saying that you don't ever go back and retweak it, but the initial production will take some time to do this and to do this correctly for your students. But it is there is such advantages to this for the educational process, for students learning, for them just integrating this in and processing all this material that's of great value. And then once you've done it, it limits down what you have to do in subsequent courses and when you teach that again. And that's why you keep everything that you do. It's just digital space. So once you load something up, then you can copy these back and forth. In fact, I'll be honest with you, I copy different lessons across for different things. And you can copy, and move things. And it's just a lot of not cutting and pasting, because it's a little different in Blackboard like we showed. But as long as you have everything there, you can do lots and lots of things. It's just the initial production to get it the way you want it. And even after you get it up the way you want it and you think you've got it clear, you're going to still get questions, as John has alluded to, from your students. And that's where we went last week with the idea of being empathetic to their needs. And that's where you will tweak things out and add sentences and provide clarifications. Things that you thought were clear may not have been clear, or navigation wasn't marked as easily. And that's how you, change things up over, the course of semesters, subsequent semesters.
Okay, very, very good. Thanks, Rick. Alicia, if you want to maybe take 15 minutes to do this, so we'll break then. It's now 11:30, 11:45, and I hope everybody that's here can stick with us for this because it is kind of an important topic, rubrics. And then if you can't get through everything, Alicia, we'll pick up with rubrics again on Friday.
Okay, sounds good. And just to Rick's point, rubrics can be reused and edited and attached to different assignments. So I think that's a really good point. What we're going to do first then is we're going to start with the control panel, and we're actually going to expand the course tools, and we're just going to scroll down to rubrics. Again, there are a couple ways to build rubrics, but this is one way. And so what we're going to do from this point is let's create a new rubric. Let's take a look at what the screen looks like. The first thing you're going to want to do if you create a new rubric is you're going to assign a name and description, and those are, just the same as assigning names and descriptions to anything else. I don't know. We'll do that. And then, I'm just going to fill that in so that I can scroll down here. What I really want you to see is that the rubrics in Blackboard are totally customizable, which is a really cool feature. As you see here, we start with 3 basic levels of achievement and 3 criteria, but that can be completely switched out and changed. By clicking on Add Row, you're going to get additional rows. And by clicking on Add Column, you can get really extensive with these. The next thing that you can do to customize your rubric is that rubrics can be scored based on points, point ranges, percentages, percent ranges, and no points. So for today, let's delete a couple of these because we don't really need this many. Keep it clear. And let's say that we wanted to add 10 points across. You get the idea. So completely customizable. Now, another thing that you can do is you can actually go in and edit all of these content areas. So when you first take a look at the general rubric, it's just like our templates in Blackboard for your courses and your weeks. You can totally edit whatever you need to. One of the things that is interesting is rubrics can be used with points or without. And depending on what you're doing, if you want to just provide feedback with no points, you can do that as well. Okay, another thing that you'll want to note is that it will total points automatically, which is a nice feature. And you also have the option of adding weights to your rubric, so percentage weights as well. Also, if you notice, you can type in complete descriptions. So you want to provide more detail in terms of what you're evaluating there for the students. And then there's a neat automatic spell check feature. So that's pretty cool. Another thing that's important is you can reorder the criteria as you wish. Blackboard is really rough because sometimes there are options that aren't easy to see. So if you notice, I had to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page just to try and reorder the criteria. And that's pretty typical. There are a few kinds of functions that's an issue. So if you notice that, just scroll all the way down to the page. Okay, what I'm going to do now, so that's the basics of building an assignment or a rubric that's not attached to assignment. What I really wanted to do today is get through attaching a rubric to an assignment, because that's really what we're talking about here. So I'm just going to grab one of my assignments. So let's imagine that you've already created an assignment, but there's no rubric associated with it. What you're going to want to do is pick out your assignment, and we're going to attach a rubric to an assignment that already exists. Now, in attaching a rubric to an assignment that already exists, you actually have a few options. So I'm going to click on Edit here to bring up my options. And this just edits the entire assignment, but I'm going to scroll all the way down to the grading section. And I hope I'm not going too fast. I just kind of want to give you the overview, and then we can talk about it. But if you notice, you can assign your points possible and add your rubric. One of the things you want to do is make sure the points possible match with the points that you've assigned to your rubric. This is especially important when you're reusing rubrics or editing them. And you'll notice you have a few options when you want to go and add a rubric to an assignment. You can select a rubric, and when you click on this option, it's going to bring up rubrics that you've already created. So you can see here I have a few rubrics, and I'll just go ahead and click on one so you can see what it looks like when we select that. Again, if you notice, my page is very limited here, so I'm going to actually click on the box to expand the page so that I can go down and click Submit to select that rubric. Once I've added that rubric, there are a few options, okay? So I've added now an existing rubric. I can edit my rubric. I can also view the rubric. Now this will bring the rubric up in a way that can't be edited. But this will bring the rubric up, and I can actually go in and edit that existing rubric from that point. Now, in addition to those options, we want to look at whether or not you're using the option for grading. This rubric is going to be used for grading. And then you have the option to show the rubric to students with scores or without scores, or hold it back until after grading. And so I actually want to show the rubric with scores because I think that's a really great feature. So, so that's it for that. You would click Submit, and that will attach that rubric now to that assignment. Are there questions so far? I know I ran through it pretty quickly, but I just kind of wanted to give an overview before we dive in a little bit further. Okay. One of the things that I wanted to do was demo grading an assignment within the rubric, and I don't know, is this a good time, or do we want to save that for next time when we're talking about the Grade Center?
I think maybe we'll save that for with the Grade Center, if that's okay.
Yes. What I would like to do is go ahead and show you all what a finished rubric then looks like. So this rubric has been attached to this assignment. And when a student goes to complete the assignment, or when you go back in to look at that assignment, you can take a look at the rubric. And so this is an example of one of the rubrics and what a student would see when they go to complete an assignment that has a rubric attached. So they can view the rubric, of course, back to the options that you showed John, write submission or attach, a document to the assignment and submit from there. All right. I think that's it. We'll talk about grading with rubrics next time. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to entertain them.
Alicia, when you clicked on view the rubric, were we supposed to see the rubric with the assignment?
Oh, yes, you did not
we
see
didn't see it. No.
Oh, okay. Let me try again. Okay. Are you guys seeing the assignment?
Yes.
Okay. I may have to share the tab.
Here, okay. Now we're saying it.
Doesn't it? Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out, Kathy. So this would be an example of a rubric with a 3x3 set of columns and rows. And this is what the student would see when they go to submit their assignment or when they go to work on their assignment. Similar to what John showed in terms of attaching a rubric as a Word doc, but this just pops up. So I'll exit that just to show you again. So yeah, I think that's a neat feature. All right.
Thank you, Alicia.
No worries.
Okay, to just kind of finish out for today, since we're kind of running out of time. This was a recap of what we're doing. We're going to finish up rubrics, and we're going to talk about the Blackboard Grade Center at the beginning of Friday's session before we get into the content for Friday. And we'll still try to stay within the time frame if we can of an hour and a half to maybe just a little wee bit more than that. And we appreciate everybody who has stuck with us. We had a lot of material to cover, particularly on Monday with instruction and today with regard to assessment. And even as such time that we took today, that's only scratching the surface of assessment. We'll have to have more training sessions and so on, or answer more questions or more one-on-one sessions as each of you individually need them moving forward. So I'm going to turn this back over for Rick to close out, and want to thank you all for bearing with me today.
Thanks, John. Excellent session. Lots of good information. Thank you, Alicia. Just a general comment as to what you're all seeing is this is like any other software program that you learn, especially within Microsoft stuff. You know within Microsoft that there are 2 or 3, sometimes 4 different ways that you can accomplish the same task. Blackboard is really no different. There's several different ways to do things. It's a matter of learning what can be done, thinking digitally. I would tell everybody, don't be overwhelmed with this. Start with the basics, which is what we have attempted to do through this, is get you a basic understanding, and then over the course of time, we can build on those skills. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've been working in Blackboard for many, many years. John has as well, but I'll guarantee both of us are learning from each other. We're learning from Alicia, from Shannon. This is an ongoing learning process of different ways and different things that you can do. So I would tell you, those that are new to this, do not get overwhelmed. This will fall into place. I trust you. It's like everything else that we're doing, and we are here to assist and to help you. I think this has been a good session. I look forward to Friday's session, and hope to see you all there. So if there are no other comments or questions, I'm going to stop the recording, and we'll close out the session for today.